Apologize to my brother or get out of my house, my wife said flatly during dinner. So I stood up, walked over to him, and said a single sentence. One sentence that ended 3 marriages, including my own. All right, Reddit, here we go? This all went down back in October, and my buddy Derek insisted I post it here because, according to him, my life has officially turned into a warning label about in-laws, toxic family dynamics, and what happens when you finally grow a backbone after 6 years of being treated like trash. That night, my wife screamed at me to apologize to her brother in front of 14 people at a family dinner. Instead of doing what she wanted, I stood up, walked across the room to where he was sitting, smirking like he always did, and said one sentence that sucked all the air out of the room. 20 minutes later, 3 marriages were over. Mine was one of them. So yeah, buckle up. This is a long one. My name is Mark. I'm 38 years old, and I work as an aerospace engineer at a mid-sized company here in California. Up until that Saturday night in October, I honestly thought I had a decent marriage. Not perfect, nothing ever is, but solid enough to build a future on. Solid enough to talk seriously about kids someday. Solid enough that I believed Laura and I would grow old together. Turns out, I was wrong. Dead wrong. Laura and I had been together for 8 years total, married for 6 of them. We lived in a comfortable suburban home in Riverside. Nothing extravagant, but a nice place in a good neighborhood. 2-car garage, a backyard big enough for a dog, the kind of house you settle into and start picturing long-term plans. We both had decent jobs. No kids yet, but we'd started having those someday conversations more seriously. I was making around $140,000 a year at my engineering firm. It was good money, a stable career, not flashy, but respectable work that I actually enjoyed waking up to every day. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing your work is literally orbiting the Earth right now, helping people on opposite sides of the planet communicate. My designs are up there. My calculations. All those late nights, early mornings, and weekends spent running simulations. That stuff matters to me, even if nobody at dinner parties ever wants to hear about satellite communication systems. Laura worked in marketing for a boutique agency downtown, pulling in about $75,000 a year. Between the two of us, we were doing better than most couples our age. We had savings, investments. We took nice vacations, Hawaii, Costa Rica, places like that. From the outside, it probably looked like we had it all figured out. The house, the careers, the plan. But anyone who's been married longer than 5 minutes knows appearances don't mean much. What people see from the outside rarely matches what's happening behind closed doors. And in our case, the problem had a name. Brian. Laura's older brother, Brian, was 42 years old and looked like he'd stepped straight out of a magazine. Tall, polished, confident. The kind of guy whose good looks alone made people assume he was successful before he even opened his mouth. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, firm handshake. You know the type. He ran a real estate development company, one that his father-in-law had basically handed to him on a silver platter. Brian loved to frame himself as a self-made man, always talking about his vision, his drive, his entrepreneurial spirit. But anyone who actually knew the backstory understood the truth. He married into money, influence, and opportunity. His wife, Michelle, came from old money. The kind of family with country club memberships going back 3 generations and vacation homes in places most people only ever see on Instagram. From the very beginning of my relationship with Laura, Brian made it clear he didn't think I was good enough for his sister. At first, it was subtle. He never came right out and said it. Just little digs here and there. Death by 1,000 cuts. Aerospace engineering, huh? That's steady, I guess. Or, Laura, are you sure you don't want someone with a little more ambition? Someone who's really going places? My personal favorite. Must be nice having a government-adjacent job where you just clock in and clock out. Some of us are out here actually building things. Every comment came wrapped in that smug smile. That condescending, punchable grin. And the second he saw my polite tolerance start to crack, he'd follow it up with, "Just kidding, man." Over the years, though, the comments stopped being subtle. They got sharper, louder, and more public. And Laura, my wife, never once stood up for me. She'd just laugh it off like it was nothing. "That's just Brian being Brian," she'd say whenever I brought it up. "He doesn't mean anything by it. He's like that with everyone." Except he wasn't. He didn't talk that way to Eric, Rachel's husband. who had just made partner at his law firm. He didn't treat any of the cousins in finance or medicine that way either. No, that treatment was reserved just for me. The aerospace engineer who worked with complex problems instead of shuffling money around and calling it entrepreneurship. I should have seen the warning signs years earlier. But I loved Laura, or at least I thought I did. So I kept my mouth shut. I kept my head down. And I kept showing up to family events where I knew I'd be treated like hired help. The dinner that finally blew everything up was supposed to be a happy occasion. Laura's parents, Thomas and Susan, were renewing their wedding vows after 40 years of marriage. 40 years. A lifetime of partnership, compromise, and building something together. They wanted to celebrate it properly, so they threw a big family gathering at their house, catered food from some fancy place downtown, decorations, the whole production. Laura's younger sister Rachel was there with her husband Eric. Brian and Michelle showed up. Of course, they never miss a chance to be seen. Laura's aunt and uncle drove in from San Diego, and a few cousins rounded things out. 14 people total, all dressed up, all playing the role of one big happy family, pretending there wasn't any dysfunction bubbling right under the surface. I knew the night was going to be bad the moment Brian pulled into the driveway in his brand new Tesla and immediately started bragging about paying cash for it. Couldn't even fit all the cash in the briefcase, he said, laughing theatrically as we all stood there. Had to use 2 bags. But hey, when you close a deal like the one I just closed, you've got to treat yourself, right? You know how it is. And that was just the beginning. He looked straight at me when he said that last part. You know how it is. Like I'd ever know what it feels like to pay cash for a luxury car after closing some sketchy real estate deal. I did what I trained myself to do over the last 6 years. I smiled. I nodded. Same routine, different insult. Don't rock the boat. Don't make a scene. Don't give Laura a reason to feel embarrassed by you. That had been the rule for years. Keep the peace. Swallow your pride. Let the comments slide. Don't push back, because pushing back would just make things uncomfortable for everyone else. Funny thing is, 6 years of keeping the peace had landed me right back at a dinner table, getting publicly humiliated while my wife stared down at her plate like it held the answers to life itself. But I'm jumping ahead. Dinner actually started off pleasant enough. Susan had gone all out. White roses everywhere, candles lining the table, soft music playing through hidden speakers in the dining room. The whole setup looked like it belonged in a lifestyle magazine. She'd clearly been planning this night for months. Thomas stood up and gave a heartfelt speech about 40 years of marriage, about partnership, commitment, and choosing to love someone even on the days when it's difficult. He talked about building something that lasts, about showing up for each other no matter what. We raised our glasses. A few people wiped their eyes. For a brief moment, it was genuinely beautiful. For about 20 minutes, everything was perfect. Then the main course arrived, and with it came Brian's irresistible urge to make himself the center of attention. So, Mark, Brian said loudly, making sure everyone at the table could hear him. He was cutting into his filet mignon like he was performing surgery. Still working on those, what do you call them? Rocket parts? I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. Here we go. Satellite components. I corrected calmly, keeping my voice steady. For communication satellites. The kind that let people make phone calls and access the internet in remote areas. Right, Brian replied, waving his fork like he was brushing off a fly. Sounds thrilling. Really cutting-edge stuff. He smirked. So how's the pay these days? Still in the low 6 figures? The table went silent. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking down the hallway. Everyone knew exactly where this was headed. They'd seen this play out before. Christmas dinners, birthdays, 4th of July barbecues. And just like always, nobody said a word. I do fine, I said simply, refusing to take the bait. Fine, Brian repeated slowly, like the word itself tasted bad. That's exactly my point, Laura. Don't you ever want more than fine? Don't you want great? Exceptional? Don't you want a husband who can give you the life you deserve? Laura shifted in her chair, but stayed quiet, staring intently at her asparagus like it might reveal the meaning of existence if she looked long enough. Brian, his wife Michelle said softly, reaching for his arm. Maybe we should change the subject. This is your parents' night. No, I'm just being honest, Brian said, leaning into it like an actor who'd finally found his spotlight. Look at what I've been able to give Michelle. The house in the hills, the pool, the view, the cars. European vacations twice a year. That's what a man should be able to provide for his wife. Not just fine, not just adequate, not barely getting by. My jaw tightened, but I kept my tone even. Different people value different things, Brian. Not everyone measures success by the size of their house or the logo on their car. Of course not, he replied, flashing that smug smile that made my hands itch. Some people measure it by ambition. Or, in your case, the lack of it. Brian, Thomas finally said, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. That's enough. This is a celebration. Dad, I'm just being honest, Brian said, holding his hands up in fake innocence. Someone has to tell him the truth. Mark's a nice guy, sure. I've never said otherwise. But nice guys finish last. Laura deserves someone who's really going to take care of her. Someone who's actually going somewhere in life. Not someone content to coast along in a middling career while waiting for a pension. That word hit me like a punch to the chest. Middling. I'd spent my entire adult life building my career. 4 years of undergrad engineering at a state school, working part-time the whole way because my parents couldn't afford to cover everything. 3 more years in grad school, surviving on ramen and stubborn hope while my classmates were out partying. Countless 60-hour weeks at my first job, trying to prove myself in a brutal field where one mistake could cost millions in equipment. I held 3 patents. My work was literally orbiting the planet. A satellite I helped design played a role in coordinating disaster relief after a typhoon hit the Philippines. Real people, real consequences, real work that mattered. And this trust fund kid, who'd been handed his entire life by a wealthy father-in-law, was calling my career middling. Something inside me shifted. Whatever restraint I'd been holding onto for 6 years finally snapped. You know what, Brian? I said, carefully setting my fork down next to my plate. I think you've made your point pretty clear. Have I? He said, leaning back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. He loved having an audience. Every eye at the table was on us now. Forks frozen midair, napkins clenched in nervous hands. Because from where I'm sitting, you still don't seem to get it. My sister could have married anyone, he continued. She's beautiful, smart, successful on her own. And she chose you. Someone who's just fine. Just adequate. Just middling. Brian, stop it, Laura said, finally speaking up, but her voice was weak, unsure. She didn't sound angry. She sounded embarrassed. And she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me, like I was the problem. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Brian went on. At family gatherings, when we talk about what everyone's doing, we talk about my latest development project. Eric just made partner at his law firm. Even the cousins are doing interesting things, Brian went on. Then we get to Mark, and it's like, yeah, he's still doing that satellite thing. Same job, same story. Nothing new, nothing exciting, just fine. I looked at my wife, really looked at her. I waited for her to step in, for her to tell her brother he'd crossed a line, to remind him that I was her husband and deserved at least a shred of respect. She opened her mouth like she might say something. Then she closed it. Her eyes dropped back down to her plate. And that's when it hit me. That's when I finally saw what I'd been refusing to acknowledge for years. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost her. Or maybe I'd never truly had her at all, and I'd been too busy working, too busy trying to prove I was enough, to notice the truth. Actually, Brian, I said, pushing my chair back and standing up slowly. There's something I think everyone at this table needs to hear. The room went completely still. You could have heard a pin hit the carpet. Brian's smirk grew wider. He looked thrilled. He was clearly imagining the story he'd be telling for years. How poor Mark finally snapped and made a fool of himself in front of the whole family. I walked around the table toward him, slow and deliberate. Every set of eyes followed me. When I stopped next to his chair, I looked down at him and said, "The reason you've been able to close all those big development deals is because your father-in-law has been funneling money from his pension fund investments into your projects." A ripple of shock went through the room. I know this, I continued evenly, because I handle aerospace contracts for the same pension fund. I've seen the documentation. I've seen the shell companies. I've seen exactly where the money is going. Brian's face drained of color like someone had pulled a plug. Michelle's wine glass slipped from her hand and hit the table, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood at a crime scene. "That's a lie," Brian said, but his voice cracked on the word lie. He sounded scared. Small. Nothing like the confident businessman he liked to pretend he was. It's not, I said calmly. Your company looks profitable on paper only because you're getting loans at interest rates that don't exist in the real market. Loans backed by pension fund money that's supposed to be safely invested for retirees, not used to prop up your commercial real estate deals. I paused, then added, I've been documenting this for months, trying to decide whether to report it, trying to decide whether I should tell Laura first. But I think you just made that decision for me. Thomas jumped to his feet, so fast his chair nearly tipped over. Is this true? He demanded. Brian, is what he's saying true? Michelle stared at her husband, horror written all over her face. Tell me it's not true, she said. Tell me my father isn't involved in this. Tell me right now. Who cares how I get the money? Brian snapped, his composure completely unraveling now. The developments work. Everyone makes money in the end. It's just creative financing. That's how business works. Except for the retirees, I said. Except for the people counting on that pension fund to still be there when they need it. Teachers, firefighters, nurses, people who worked for 30 years believing their savings were safe. And now it's paying for your Tesla and your house in the hills. Laura grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. Mark, what are you doing? She hissed. What I should have done months ago, I said, turning to her, really seeing her, maybe for the first time in years. Telling the truth. Your brother spent 6 years calling me a failure, mocking my career, calling everything I've worked for middling. And the whole time, he was committing fraud. And you let him tear me down every single time. That's when everything exploded. Michelle started screaming at Brian, demanding to know what else he'd lied about. How deep did it go? Was their entire life built on fraud? Thomas stepped into the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, his face gray like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Susan sat at the head of the table crying, her beautiful vow renewal dinner in ruins. The candles still flickered. The roses were still perfect. None of it mattered anymore. Rachel and Eric tried to calm everyone down while looking completely horrified. Eric caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Laura stared at me like I was a stranger, like she didn't recognize the man she'd married. You humiliated my family, she said quietly, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. Your brother humiliated me for years, I shot back. Every holiday, every birthday, every family dinner. And you let him. This entire family let him. You all just sat there and watched. That's not the same thing, she said. Brian was joking. He didn't mean anything by it. You just destroyed his marriage, his reputation, everything he's worked for. Everything he's worked for. I almost laughed. He's never worked for anything in his life. He married money, then stole more of it. That's not work. That's crime. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and finally accepted what I'd been avoiding for 6 years. She wasn't upset because her brother was a fraud. She was upset because I exposed it. To her, protecting the family image mattered more than protecting her husband. More than the truth. More than the retirees whose savings were being stolen. Apologize to Brian, Laura said, her voice rising now, her face flushed red. Apologize right now for making those accusations in front of everyone. They're not accusations, I said evenly. They're facts. Documented facts. And I'm not apologizing for telling the truth. Then get out, she snapped. If you won't apologize to my brother, then get out of my house. Right now. The room went silent again. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone frozen in place, staring at us like statues. Your house, I asked quietly. The house we bought together? The house I've been paying most of the mortgage on for 6 years, I said quietly. Because your salary never quite covered your half. Our house. Our house, Laura corrected quickly. And I'm telling you to leave if you won't apologize. I took one last look around the table. At Brian, pale, sweating, finally exposed. At Michelle, mascara streaking down her face. At Thomas, still pacing in the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear. At Susan, crying into her napkin at the head of the table. At all of them. The people who'd sat back and watched Brian tear me down year after year without ever stepping in. A family that cared more about appearances than integrity. And at my wife, who was still choosing her brother over her husband, even now, even after everything that had just come to light. I'll pack my things tomorrow, I said. My voice didn't shake. You can keep the house. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. Laura's face drained of color. Divorce? Mark, wait, I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I cut in. You meant exactly what you said. You just didn't think I'd actually leave. You thought I'd apologize. You thought I'd cave like I always do. But I'm done caving. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. I drove downtown, checked into a hotel on the 4th floor, and sat on the edge of the bed for 3 hours straight, just staring at the wall, not thinking, not feeling, just existing in the wreckage of what had just happened. My marriage was over. 8 years gone in about 20 minutes. Not because of cheating, not because of some secret financial betrayal, but because I finally stood up for myself, because I refused to apologize for being disrespected. The next morning, I went back to the house while Laura was staying with her parents, probably being comforted, probably being told I was the villain in this story. I packed my clothes into suitcases, gathered my personal belongings, and pulled my important documents from the filing cabinet in the office. I left everything else behind. The furniture we'd picked out together at that store in Costa Mesa. The decorations she'd chosen for every room. The framed photos of vacations, holidays, and smiling moments that apparently hadn't meant as much as I thought. I didn't want any of it. Every item felt like proof of a life I'd been living wrong. That same week, I rented a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy. Functional. Impersonal. Bare walls. Basic furniture from a discount store. A place to sleep, eat, and figure out what came next. No emotional investment required. It was exactly what I needed. The silence was strange at first. No one asking where I was going. No passive-aggressive comments about my work schedule. No dramatic sighs whenever I mentioned satellites or engineering specs. Just me, my thoughts, and the steady hum of the refrigerator. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The fallout from that dinner was massive. Within a week, Michelle filed for divorce from Brian. And it turned out the pension fund situation was even worse than I'd realized. Brian hadn't just been getting sweetheart loans with preferential rates. He'd been actively siphoning money through a web of shell companies, burying the trail under layers of corporate paperwork that would have made an accountant's head spin. When the official investigation kicked off, it uncovered years of deliberate financial manipulation. Brian's development company collapsed in less than a month. Projects were abandoned halfway through construction. Investors scrambled to recover whatever they could. His father-in-law ended up facing federal charges for his role in the scheme. The story hit local business news, then regional outlets, and eventually national headlines. The media loves a downfall story, especially when it involves rich people behaving badly. Mugshots and all. Brian looked nothing like the confident golden boy he'd always pretended to be. Just a scared, middle-aged man stuck in a mess he'd created entirely on his own. But here's what really caught me off guard. About 2 weeks after I moved out, Eric, Rachel's husband, called me out of the blue. "Mark," he said, "there's something I need to tell you. I've wanted to say it for years, but I was too scared of what it would do to the family. Too scared of being pushed out." "Like what's happening to me now?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly like that." "What is it?" I asked. "Brian's been pulling this kind of stuff for years. Not just the pension fund thing. He's manipulated everyone in this family his entire life. He lies about his accomplishments, exaggerates his success, takes credit for other people's work, and mocks anyone who doesn't worship him. I've watched it happen dozens of times." He paused, then added, "Every time I tried to bring it up to Rachel, the family would close ranks around him. They'd tell me I was jealous, that I didn't understand how business really works, that I should be supportive instead of critical." "So why tell me now?" I asked. "Because you're the first person who ever stood up to him," Eric said. "And I wanted you to know that not everyone in this family thought you were the problem. Some of us saw exactly what was happening. We just weren't brave enough to do anything about it." He sighed. "I should have said something years ago. I'm sorry I didn't." That conversation stayed with me for a long time. It confirmed what I'd felt but couldn't prove. That I wasn't crazy. That Brian's behavior wasn't normal. That I hadn't been overreacting or making something out of nothing. Someone else had seen it. Someone else had noticed. They'd just been too afraid to speak up. It wasn't just about Brian. It was about a whole family system that had enabled him for decades, protected him, excused his behavior, and attacked anyone who dared question him. Laura had been raised inside that system. She'd learned early on that protecting the family image mattered more than telling the truth, more than doing what was right. Some lessons get so deeply ingrained that people don't even realize they've learned them. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. Laura tried to take everything, the house, the savings, my retirement accounts. Her lawyer argued that I destroyed her family and owed her compensation for emotional damage. They actually tried to argue that what I said at that dinner counted as emotional abuse, as if exposing a criminal somehow amounted to abusing my spouse. The logic was almost impressive in how twisted it was. Luckily, I had a strong lawyer, an excellent one, actually, recommended by Eric. And more importantly, I had receipts. Years worth of them. 6 years of mortgage records showing I'd paid far more than my share. Bank statements proving I covered most of our household expenses while Laura used her discretionary money on clothes, trips with friends, and weekend getaways. Then there were the financial records showing she'd quietly funneled thousands of dollars from our joint savings into her brother's development company over the years, without ever telling me. Money that vanished when his business collapsed. When everything was laid out in court, the reality was impossible to ignore. I'd been carrying the financial load of our marriage for a long time. Meanwhile, Laura and her family treated me like a convenient ATM, one that should be grateful just to be invited to family dinners. In the end, we split everything 50-50, which, ironically, meant I walked away with more than half of what I'd originally put in. The judge didn't buy the emotional abuse claim, not even for a second. But honestly, I didn't care about winning. I just wanted it finished. I wanted that chapter of my life closed for good. The part that really surprised me came about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was at the grocery store doing my weekly shopping, simple stuff for a single guy. Chicken breasts, vegetables, rice. Basics. I was standing in the produce section, turning an avocado over in my hand, when I heard someone say my name. Mark. I turned around and almost didn't recognize her. Susan, Laura's mother, looked like she'd aged 10 years and 6 months. Her hair was grayer, her face lined. She looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than just being tired. Susan, I said, how are you? Can we talk for a minute? She asked quietly. I know I don't really have the right to ask, but can we? So we stood there in the produce aisle, surrounded by people debating apples and tomatoes, and she told me something I never expected to hear. You were right, she said. About Brian. About all of it. She took a breath before continuing. Thomas and I, we knew something was wrong for years. Decades, really. We just didn't want to face it. We raised him to believe he was special, that rules didn't apply to him the way they applied to everyone else, that he deserved success simply because of who he was. And we let that belief destroy him. We let it destroy everything. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you deserved better, Susan said, tears welling in her eyes. From all of us, but especially from Laura. She was so afraid of disappointing us, of not living up to our expectations, that she forgot how to be your partner. She forgot that marriage means choosing your spouse over everyone else, even your family, especially when your family is wrong. How is Laura? I asked, surprising myself by even wanting to know. Alone, Susan said simply. She moved back in with us for a while after the divorce, but it didn't work. Too many memories. Too much damage. She's in a small apartment now, working long hours, not seeing anyone. I think she's trying to figure out who she is without us telling her who to be. I felt a small ache in my chest. Not regret exactly. More like sadness for what might have been. If we'd both been different people, if she'd been willing to see me as I was instead of through her family's warped expectations. I hope she figures it out, I said. And I meant it. Mark, Susan said as I started to turn back to my cart. I know it's too late. I know it doesn't change anything. But I'm sorry. For what Brian did to you all those years. For what we all did by allowing it. By never standing up and telling him to stop. You deserved a family that stood by you. And we failed you. Every one of us. I nodded and walked away. Brian's trial began 2 months ago. The pension fund investigation uncovered so much fraud that federal prosecutors went all in. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy charges. The full list. His lawyers tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the government wasn't interested. Too many retirees had lost too much. The judge denied bail after ruling Brian was a flight risk. So he's been sitting in a federal holding facility, waiting for the trial to finish. Last I heard, he's facing 12 to 15 years if he's convicted on all counts. The golden boy of the Mitchell family, now wearing an orange jumpsuit and eating cafeteria food. Turns out all that talk about being self-made doesn't mean much when the feds start subpoenaing your shell company records. His father-in-law flipped almost immediately. Took a plea deal, 5 years in federal prison, in exchange for testimony against Brian. He's already serving time in a minimum security facility in Arizona. The country club membership his family had held for 3 generations, revoked. The vacation homes, seized as part of asset forfeiture. 60 years of old money prestige wiped out in about 6 months. Michelle didn't waste any time either. She filed for divorce within a week of the indictment, took the kids, and moved to Colorado. Changed their last name back to her maiden name. Last I heard, she's working as a real estate agent now, legit this time. Starting over at 40 with 2 kids. I can't say I blame her for wanting a clean slate. About 3 months after my divorce was finalized, my boss called me into his office. I assumed it was about the Henderson satellite project. We'd been wrestling with thermal management issues, and I'd been putting in extra hours to fix them. Instead, he slid a folder across his desk. Senior systems engineer, he said. 15% raise. Your own team of 4. And first shot at the DoD contract we've been chasing for 2 years. I just stared at him. What changed? You did, he said. The last 6 months, you've been different. More confident. More willing to push back when something's wrong. More willing to take ownership. Whatever had gone sideways in my personal life ended up sharpening me at work. My boss basically said that straight out. Whatever I'd been through had made me better, more focused. So his solution was to give me more responsibility to match it. The raise pushed my salary to $161,000 a year. Not stock options, not future value, but real money. Cash. The kind you actually earn. The moment I'd been dreading finally showed up about 8 months after the divorce. I was downtown at a cozy Italian restaurant with Emily. We'd been seeing each other for around 3 months by then. Nice place, quiet table in the corner, a solid bottle of wine. We were talking about her students, my new project at work, and maybe taking a long weekend trip to San Diego. Then I looked up, and there was Laura, standing near the hostess stand. She noticed me at the exact same time and froze, like a deer caught in headlights. She looked different, thinner, worn down. The polished marketing executive who always had everything together now looked like someone who hadn't slept right in a long time. She was alone. No date, no friends. Just her, wearing a nice dress that hung a little looser than it used to. For a second, I thought she might walk over. Maybe she'd try to talk. Maybe she'd cause a scene. But she didn't. She just looked at me, then at Emily, then back at me again. I gave her a small nod. That was it. Nothing else. She turned around and walked right out of the restaurant. Emily saw the whole thing. Ex-wife? She asked. Yep. She looks miserable. Yep. Emily reached across the table and took my hand. Good, she said. I laughed. Actually laughed. It was the first time in almost a year that thinking about Laura didn't make my chest tighten. Eric called me again about a month later. He and Rachel had separated. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic. Just the slow collapse of something that couldn't survive what had happened. Rachel couldn't let it go. She blamed me for tearing her family apart. Blamed Eric for not defending Brian. Blamed everyone except the one person who actually caused all of it. She kept saying things would have gone back to normal if I'd just kept my mouth shut. Eric said it like the fraud would have magically fixed itself. Like the retirees would have just gotten their money back on their own. She can't accept that Brian did this to himself, he said. I asked him how he was holding up. Honestly, better than I expected, he said. I've been carrying this family's secrets for 8 years. Watching Brian get away with everything while the rest of us smiled and nodded. It's exhausting pretending you don't see what's right in front of you. Then he paused. You know the worst part? I think Rachel knows the truth deep down. She just can't admit it. Because if she does, she has to admit her whole family was built on lies. I knew exactly what he meant. Brian's sentencing came down last week. Guilty on all counts. 14 years in federal prison, plus restitution payments that'll follow him for the rest of his life. The judge didn't mince words either. She talked about his brazen disregard for working people's retirement savings and called it one of the most egregious pension fraud cases she'd seen in 20 years on the bench. They showed his mugshot on the evening news. The guy who used to brag about paying cash for Teslas was now standing in front of a height chart, wearing an orange jumpsuit with a booking number under his chin. The man who once mocked my career as middling is about to spend the next decade and a half learning what it's like when the government takes everything you own. I won't lie, it felt good watching that segment. Emily and I were eating dinner when it came on. She glanced at me and raised her glass. "To karma," she said. "To karma," I agreed. Thomas called me the day after the sentencing. It was the first time we'd spoken since that conversation in the grocery store with Susan. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he said. His voice sounded old. Broken. "He's going to prison. My son is going to prison." I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. "You were right," he went on. "About everything. We raised him to think he was untouchable. We made excuses every time he cut corners. We told ourselves it was just ambition. Just drive. Just Brian being Brian." He let out a bitter laugh. Funny how that phrase keeps coming back to haunt us. "I'm sorry it turned out this way," I said. And strangely enough, I meant it. Not for Brian. He earned every day of that sentence. But for Thomas and Susan, who had to watch their son get led away in handcuffs after spending 40 years enabling him. Before hanging up, Thomas said one last thing. "For what it's worth, and I know it's not worth much, you were the best thing that ever happened to my daughter." She just couldn't see it. None of us could. Emily moved in with me 3 weeks ago. We found a bigger place, a 2-bedroom apartment with a mountain view and enough room for her books and my project equipment. Nothing fancy. Brian probably would have called it middling. But here's the thing about Emily. She actually cares about what I do. Last Tuesday, I came home stressed about a design flaw we'd found in the thermal coupling system. Most people would have checked out 10 seconds into that conversation. Emily sat with me for 2 hours. She asked questions. Helped me think it through. Genuinely tried to understand. She even sketched out a possible solution on the back of a napkin that ended up being surprisingly close to what we eventually implemented. "You know what I love about your job?" she said that night. "You're literally putting things in space that help people communicate. That's way cooler than whatever Brian was doing, stealing from old people." "Exactly," I said. "I build satellites. He built a prison sentence." I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my dinner. So that's where things stand now. Brian's in federal prison, starting a 14-year sentence. His father-in-law isn't far behind him. Michelle's rebuilding her life in Colorado. Rachel and Eric are separated. Laura's alone in a small apartment somewhere, probably still telling herself I'm the one who ruined everything. And me? I've got a promotion, a girlfriend who respects what I do, and an apartment that finally feels like home, more than that house with Laura ever did. My satellite components are still orbiting Earth, helping people communicate across continents. Still doing the same work Brian once called middling, back when he was busy committing federal crimes. The other day, I got an email from my old engineering professor. One of my former students is interning at my company now. "She told me you're the reason she went into aerospace," he wrote. "Said you gave a talk at her high school career day 3 years ago, and it changed her life." I don't even remember that talk. But apparently, while I was busy feeling like a failure because some trust fund fraud kept telling me I wasn't good enough, I was out there inspiring the next generation of engineers. Funny how that works. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.